My name is Jerry Gill. Today is November 22, 2010. I'm visiting Nancy Finley on the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the O State Storage Project, the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And Nancy, appreciate you taking time to come and visit with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me.
I know your husband, Eddy Finley, was instrumental in helping initiate OSU's Spirit Rider program.
Yes.
And I want to visit with you a little bit about that later. But first, could I ask you a little bit about your background, where you grew up, your early life?
I was born and raised in Lubbock, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from Texas Tech University back in the 70s. I married Eddy in 1979, and he pursued his doctoral degree at Oklahoma State University. And that's how we ended up here.
So you started, you enrolled at Texas Tech in what year, in fall of?
Oh gosh, let me think. It was the fall of '67.
So you graduated from high school in 1967.
Uh-huh.
Which school did you graduate from?
Coronado High School.
Okay. Any activities, things you did in high school you recall? Want to share?
I was a member of the Mustang Tri-High-Y, the Spirit Squad. Let's see. Various and sundry different clubs.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, brothers and sisters in your family?
I have one sister. She lives in Plano, Texas, and she's about 9 years older than I am.
And what did your dad do for a living?
My dad was a mechanical engineer for the government, and my mother was a homemaker.
Okay, great. So again, as you indicated, you met Eddy then at Lubbock. Is there a story there about how you met? I mean, there's got to sure be a good story in there somewhere.
Yes, I was a senior in nursing school when I met Eddy, and I met him at I had just finished my surgical rotation in nursing school, and my girlfriend and I went out to have a beer at a place called Coldwater Cattle Company, and that's where I met Eddy, and we met in November of 1978, and we were married in July of 1979.
Didn't take long for the romance to blossom then?
No, not long.
That's great. Can you tell me a little bit about Eddy, his early life, and where he grew up, and kind of how he got to Tech?
Eddy grew up in a little place called Allen Reed, Texas.
For me?
Allen Reed, Texas. It's right off of I-40, off of the Caprock of Texas. It's about, 67 miles southeast of Amarillo, Texas. He went to school at McLean. He also rodeoed. He was a member of the PRCA rodeo. Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association.
Thank you.
His parents owned around 15 sections of land, so they had a fairly large ranch there. And he went to Texas Tech at the same time that I went to Texas Tech, but we kind of went in different circles. You know, I didn't date cowboys, dated fraternity guys and football players, and so we found out later that we knew a lot of the same people. But, you know, I'm sure our paths crossed, but we never, paid much attention. I probably never paid much attention. But Eddy got his master's and his bachelor's from Texas Tech, and then he got his doctorate in ag ed from Oklahoma State.
Great. Well, what about yourself? I mean, you were in nursing school.
I was in nursing school at Texas Tech.
Is that like a 2+2 program, or how does it work?
It was a Texas, well, we didn't have the regular baccalaureate program back then, so it was Texas Tech Methodist Hospital School of Nursing 4-year program.
Okay. It's got a BS degree program.
Yeah, it was a combination. The year after I graduated was the year they got the baccalaureate program at Tech, but we were still considered Tech graduates. So.
And you're a registered nurse.
Yes,
right?
I'm a registered nurse. Mm-hmm.
Well, so Eddy obviously had a passion for horses and ranching from the get-go. I mean,
yeah,
wow.
He went to Texas Tech on a rodeo scholarship. He was a header, a roper, and a saddlebranch rider. So.
You didn't bulldog, huh?
No, no bulldogging.
That's good. What about student organizations that Eddy was involved in, you recall, when he was at Tech?
He was a member of the Rodeo Association. He was a member of various and sundry agricultural associations. Eddie was involved in about everything. So, he was just one of those go-getters.
So now you're in a sorority. Which sorority were you in?
I was in Phi Mu.
Okay.
Eddie was not in a fraternity. So.
Some of your activities and things in college?
Well, probably the same thing that the kids do nowadays. Remember the homecoming committee?
Did you get the pomp and do all that good stuff?
No, I didn't do any of the pomp stuff. I wasn't a member of the pomp squad.
I meant the pomp and putting in the...
Oh, yeah, all the little tissue paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got to do that. Our homecoming wasn't quite as grandiose as Oklahoma State's, but it was good.
So, again, what year did Eddie graduate for his bachelor's degree?
Let's see, Eddie graduated with his bachelor's degree in 1971. He graduated with his master's degree in 1973, and then he went to Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, for about 4 years and was chief consultant to the Crown Prince on agricultural affairs. And he had just gotten back to the United States when I met him. And, he was telling me he was going to go get his doctorate, and I thought, okay. And he kept telling me that, and I finally asked him, I said, why are you telling me that? And I said, you've already told me about 12 times. And he said, he said, I just wanted you to know that after we're married, that's what we're going to be doing. And this was about 15 minutes after I met him, and I thought, okay.
Did you check and see how long he'd been there when you...
Well, I thought perhaps I might have married Norman Bates at Psycho or met him or whatnot, but...
Okay. So, let me back up, and this is something I didn't know about Eddie. So after he finished his master's degree, which was in agriculture education as well, then he went to Bahrain?
Bahrain, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia
Yeah.
for 4 years?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some of his activities there, do you recall? Did he tell you about them?
Well, mostly he was a consultant for agricultural matters over there, what they could grow as far as crops, and basically just consulted with the Crown Prince. And I don't know, there are several Crown Princes in the Saudi Arabian dynasty, but basically just worked with them off and on. We come back to the United States, in intervals and whatnot. But yeah, he worked over there for a while.
Well, kind of back to Texas Tech experience. When do you, I guess if you'd grown up in Tech and gone to some games, you'd seen the Masked Rider even before you were in college, right? I mean,
You bet.
Do you remember what some of your first memories was, or your thoughts about the Masked Rider?
Probably when I was a sophomore in high school. Some of our good friends had a son that went to Texas A&M who was in the Corps, and we were playing Texas A&M, and so he asked me to go to the game with him, and I think I was maybe 15 and he was 20 some odd, but we had been lifelong friends, our parents had, so I went to the game with him. And first time I saw the Masked Rider, I thought it was really neat. Of course, we grew up with that tradition, but just basically going to see the horse. But yeah, it was really pretty. And the horse at the time was called Charcoal Cody. And there's a track that goes around the football field of Texas Tech where the horse runs. So the horse never goes out on the field.
What is... the Masked Rider, of course, is, I guess, the official mascot for Texas Tech. What does he symbolize for Texas Tech people?
Well, it's kind of like the Spirit Rider. It's just one of, in that part of the country, because Texas, or Lubbock, is really built on land called Llano Estacado, because that part of Texas also was, part of Mexico at one time. And just kind of a symbolization between the Spanish heritage and the American heritage. So Texas Tech, I don't know if you've ever been on their campus, but many of their buildings are in the Spanish format, the engineering buildings, the mathematical buildings, and they have kept that tradition all these years. And so the Masked Rider kind of symbolizes kind of like a Zorro type. If you looked at the Masked Rider and didn't really know what the Masked Rider was, you would think it was Zorro, because they do wear the cape, they do wear the bolero hat, they do have the mask and whatnot, and they're on a solid black horse.
Thank you. And we'll come back to Masked Rider later on, just in a couple minutes. But did want to, after Eddie came back, then you met him after he'd come back from
Yes.
Saudi Arabia.
He was back about 6 months when I met him.
And so then you got married a few months after that. Could you kind of trace your career before you come to Oklahoma State after that?
After we got married?
After you got married, was there a time in there before you came to
Well,
OSU?
I was still living in Lubbock because I was working at Methodist Hospital. And Eddie had been teaching at Roosevelt High School, about 11 miles south of Lubbock. And so after the end of his teaching there, and at the time Eddie really didn't know where he was going to go to school. He had applied at 9 graduate schools and been accepted by all 9. So we were kind of trying to figure out where we wanted to go. And the first place that we were going to go was Fort Collins. But unfortunately, I couldn't get a job in Colorado because nobody likes to leave Colorado. Everybody that graduates likes to stay there. So we ended up coming to Oklahoma State. But Eddie moved back to the ranch. We were married July the 14th of 1979, and he came out from the ranch. We were married that weekend. Had about a 2-day honeymoon, and he went back to the ranch, and I stayed in Lubbock and worked. And then on my days off, I would drive to the ranch. It's about a 3-hour drive from Allen Reed to Lubbock. And so we did that until he was accepted to OSU, and we came here.
What was that, 1980? Or?
No, that was 1979.
79,
Yeah.
okay.
September of 79.
So you had opportunities to go to several different graduate programs.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a reason that he was influenced to come to Oklahoma State?
Well, actually, when we found out, we were sitting in Denny's in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I was telling you that I could work per diem or part-time as a nurse, and of course with my husband being in graduate school, I needed full-time employment. And so he said that Oklahoma State had presented, an interest in him to come and work on his doctoral studies there. And so here we are, and he said, why don't we just drive to Stillwater? So we got in our car and we drove all day and part of the evening and got into Stillwater and met with Dr. Robert Terry later on that afternoon of the next day when we arrived, and he offered Eddie a graduate assistantship. Very, very intelligent man, but you would know it, very down-to-earth man.
Was Dr. Terry his chairman of his?
Robert Terry was the head of the
committee?
department at the time of Ag Ed and kind of his confidant. Dr. Robert Price was really more of a mentor to Eddie than anyone.
So Eddie, how long did before he finished his doctoral program?
He started in September of 1979, and he graduated in May of 1981.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah, and then we moved back to Texas. We moved to Vernon, Texas. I told him one of the stipulations of him coming to Oklahoma is that we had to go back home to Texas when he finished. But I didn't want to live in Oklahoma. I didn't like Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Texas as well as he was, but and we moved
West
to
Texas.
Yeah, we moved to Vernon, Texas for about 14 months. He was the head of the junior college ag ed department and the rodeo advisor. And then our daughter JJ, or Jessica, was born in Vernon. And when she was about 4 months old in October of 1982, we moved back to Stillwater.
You got a teaching position then on the faculty?
They offered him a assistant professorship, and from there he just kind of gradually went up the ladder.
So during these periods, were you then working in nursing?
Kind of off and on. I started to work, basically back to work in 1984, about 4 months after Justin was born, at the Student Health Center.
Okay. So you moved back then to Stillwater, and what year would that have been, in 82?
82, October of 82 is when we moved back.
Okay. And then you worked at the...
I didn't start working, I kind of worked off and on at different per diem jobs, just fill-ins and things, because we had a new baby and I was staying home. And then I became pregnant with our son Justin, and basically started back to work full time in April of 1984.
And you were working here at the university?
I was working at the university as a staff nurse, and then in 1992 I became the assistant director of nurses.
And Donald Doc Cooper was the head. If you got some good Cooper stories that you can tell.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Worked for Dr. Cooper for a while, and yeah.
Well, do you remember when Eddie first started thinking about the spirit rider concept?
It was in, let's see, it was in May of '84, because the spirit rider, which many people don't know, is really the mascot for the band. The band wanted a mascot, and so William Ballinger, who I think is now the band director at Texas Tech, was at OSU at the time, and he and another gentleman in the band department called Eddie, knowing that Eddie had gone to Texas Tech and that we had a rider, a spirit rider type, the masquerader, and asked him if he would consider maybe coming together and talking about getting a mascot for the band. And at that time, Eddie was he was doing a lot of traveling, because one of his jobs was to certify first-year ag teachers in the state of Oklahoma. So he was doing quite a bit of traveling. And so he said he would think about it, and he came home and we talked about it, and he said, this is kind of what I thought we might do, and I want to see what you think, And then he talked about kind of the similarities between the Red Raider and something similar for OSU.
So he was influenced by the mask rider influence?
Mostly of what he was influenced by was the horse aspect, because of being raised on a horse and cattle ranch, because he was a member of the PRCA Rodeo Association, and because he had worked with horses all of his life. He wanted to kind of bring that influence, since Oklahoma A&M was a state school, supported school, and there was agricultural influence here. He thought that we would bring something, because you already had Pistol Pete, and so he thought, well, he would bring something similar to what Texas Tech had. So he talked about it, we thought about it, we went over a lot of, different scenarios, and finally he asked me what I thought about maybe having a guy on a horse that just rode out on the field carrying an OSU flag, dressed like a working cowboy. And I told him I thought that would be really good. And I also told him, I said, if you're going to have that happen, then it has to be a real cowboy. It can't be somebody that just wears boots and a hat. They have to have a ranching and farming background. And he agreed with that. He thought, And his first person that came to mind to be the first spirit rider was John Bell. John Bell and Eddie were good friends. Also, he was John's advisor, and also John was the president of the Rodeo Association. Eddie had been asked to take over the club because the kids were really wanting to resurrect the Rodeo Association. And in the first year and second year, I think it was first and second year, and maybe in first and third year, Eddie brought them from the very bottom of the clubs at Oklahoma State to the very top, and they won top club in the College of Ag. So whatever Eddie did, he didn't do on the spur of the moment. Whatever he did, he put a lot of thought process into it. He thought about it, he planned it out, he mapped it out. He committed to nothing until he had everything completely organized. Fortunately, he wasn't that way at home. But about his students, his studies, and the Spirit Rider of the Rodeo Association, anything that he was asked to tackle, took great thought and planning. He just never did anything by the spur of the moment.
To your knowledge, is Did Eddie or anyone else visit with Texas Tech about their Spirit Rider program at OSU?
No.
And did OSU ever have any, did Texas Tech ever have any issues with OSU creating a similar kind of, but slightly
No,
different
not really,
mascot?
because Wyoming also has a, of course they have a Shetland pony, but they call it, they're the Wyoming Cowboys, and they kind of have their cowboys run out with the little horse and stuff. But, Ed, when the program first started, it was Eddy, John Bell, his horse Stella, and then Hooker was John Bell's little cattle dog. He was a little blue heeler.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to all the games and sat on the sideline, because when John got ready to run out onto the field, he would tell Hooker to stay. And one time he forgot to tell Hooker to stay, and so Hooker ran out on the field with him, and everybody loved it. And for a couple of years after John had graduated and we had new Spirit Riders, everybody wanted to know where the little dog was.
What happened to the dog? Huh?
Yeah, Hooker became very, very popular, and but the boys rode their own horses up until the last thing Eddy did before he turned over the reins of the Spirit Rider to Don Topliff was to find a horse for OSU. And what he was looking for was a very gentle horse that children could come up and pet, pull the tail, just do whatever, and the horse would not kick. It was not frightful of the crowds, because they used to have to stuff cotton in the ears of the horse because it was so loud out on the field, and sometimes it would spook the horse, especially Penny, who was the Bailey boys, who was Brad, Kenny, and Steve Bailey. But, this was a concept that he took just a little bit of what Tech had to offer and kind of made it his own. And he was very precise. So there was no Spirit Rider Corps at that time. There was no trailer. No pickup was donated. Whoops. There was just everybody had their own thing. This is my daughter-in-law. I'm sorry. I should have turned my phone off. I apologize. I'll call her back if I can find my phone. Okay. Sorry. So what we were basically looking for was just a mascot that the band would be happy with, that the tradition could carry on.
Next time we come back and ask you a couple of questions about that.
Okay.
So if I understood right, the band, did they come to Eddy?
No, the director of the band came to
Bill
Eddy.
Bellinger.
He called Eddy. And there was another gentleman too, and I think his last name started with an S, but I don't think he was in the picture much. But basically Bill Ballinger, and then on down the line, Myron Roderick and Dave Martin worked with Ed also.
Well, you alluded to a couple of things. First of all, the horse, we call it the horseman Spirit Rider. Who come up with the term Spirit Rider?
Eddy.
Okay, so it's Eddy. You come up with the term.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was his thing about? Of course, Mask Rider. There's the rider, but what was his thoughts on the spirit part of it?
Just the spirit of OSU, and you had a experienced rider, so he thought Spirit Rider was kind of a catchy name that people could remember. So that's.
Do you remember some other names he was thinking about as he came
No,
up
he
with
really
it?
wasn't thinking of any. I mean, he said, I think, because again, when Eddy was asked to do something or there was a plan or whatnot, I mean, he thought about it for a long period of time. So when he came up with Spirit Rider, that was what it was going to be.
All right, thank you. So you alluded earlier to the fact that, of course, OSU already has a mascot, Pistol Pete. Why did Eddy and others feel that they needed a Spirit Rider in addition to Pistol Pete?
I think that the band just always felt like they needed something to kind of define who they were. So they wanted something to make them stand out. And probably to this day, because the Spirit Rider started in 1984, and now we're in 2010, so we're looking at 26 years. I doubt very seriously, if you were not involved at that time with the Spirit Rider, that you would not realize that Spirit Rider is the band's mascot.
Is it still that way today?
It should, well, it
No,
was
no,
as long as
no.
my husband was in charge of it, but whether it is, I don't have a lot to do with that anymore.
Well, Nancy, you're talking a little bit about the riders. It was first you had John Bell.
There was John Bell, then Raymond Russ, then Brad Bailey, Kenny Bailey, and Todd Honer.
And these are the ones that worked under
Eddie.
Eddy. Okay.
And as time went on, Eddy always, one of the things that he always did that we always thought was nice, and these pictures hung in Ag Hall for a long time now. They're at my house, packed away, but the boys each got a picture. Eddy always had a professional picture made of the boys on their horse, either in front of Ag Hall, the Saratine Center, the Ansai Arena. I'm trying to think where else. I think those were the only places. Maybe in front of the library. Carrying the flag and dressed in their regalia. Just something, and had a little, nameplate underneath their name, saying their name and what year they were the Spirit Rider, and then my husband's name and that he was the advisor. Eddy was the advisor of the Rodeo Association, or the Spirit Rider Association, from 1984 to 1989.
You remember some of the ones that followed him? You mentioned Don Toffless. And
Don Topliff was a good friend of Eddy's and took over the program when Eddy decided he, had done it long enough and wanted to turn the reins over. And it was pretty fortunate because not long after he turned over the reins of it, my husband became ill. And Don Topliff, David Freeman, and that's really all I can remember at that time. After Eddy became ill, I didn't have much to do with the football program, or didn't go to many football games. And
well, you were mentioning some people involved. What do you recall in the process? Who were some of the decision makers? I mean, you mentioned Bill Ballinger was Gerald Frank. Was that the other person that you're thinking about?
Yeah, that name sounds familiar.
You mentioned Myron Roderick, who was athletic director.
Mm-hmm.
Were those the decision makers involved in when they actually?
The decision for the mascot, the decision for what the mascot was going to be was all Eddy's.
Okay.
They asked him to come up with a mascot. He came up with one. He presented it to them. They all thought it was pretty good. In September of 1984, myself, Eddy, John, Della, and Hooker were the only ones out there on the field. When OSU scored their first touchdown, John ran out, full blast, on the field with the flag flying, and at that time they could run from end zone to end zone. And people just went crazy. I mean, they just loved it, and a lot of people wrote in saying it was great. Well, as the program built, then Eddy started putting together a Spirit Rider Corps. And from what I can see when I go to the games now, not much of that has changed too much from the way that Eddy did it. There are girl riders now, and I think most of the Spirit Corps right now are girls. I haven't seen too many guys. But, he got teeners to donate the outfits that the Spirit Corps and the rider. One of his good friends in Tulsa tooled the saddle for Bullet and the reins. He had another good friend in Chickasha at Stedman Trailers that donated the first Spirit Rider trailer. And we went
Do you
to.
remember what year that was?
I believe. Let me think. I believe that was 1986. And then Ron Shirley also donated a pickup truck because Eddy was using his truck to pull the trailer. So a lot of things were donated, and the program grew and grew, and then the process of picking a new Spirit Rider every year was pretty tedious. I mean, they had to have a farm and ranching background. I believe Eddy did an oral examination of them, watched how they rode, how they handled their horses, just to make sure that they really could ride them.
Talking about the horse, going back to Bullet, you mentioned earlier, can we talk about Bullet? First of all, there was no Bullet by name for the first 3 or 4 years. So when did they first name the horse Bullet, and do you remember what year that was?
It was right before Eddy decided not to be the advisor anymore. It was 1989. And he and Raymond Rusty Rust, his father, and Rusty was the second spirit rider, were out looking for a horse. And so right outside of Chandler, they found a horse. And Eddy said that was the ugliest horse he had ever seen. But all dolled up, he'd look pretty good. Gentle horse, sweet horse, had been, I think, the children's horse of these people. So for $500 in season's tickets, Bullet was purchased. Only Bullet wasn't named Bullet at the time. Bullet was named Possum.
Possum.
The horse's name was Possum. So, Ed told me, he said, we can't have a horse running out on the field by the name of Possum. So he got together with some gentlemen and decided that they were going to have a campus-wide naming contest for the new Spirit Rider horse. And the students picked Bullet, and that's how Bullet got his name.
Just a trivia, you wouldn't happen to remember the name of the student who won the contest, would you?
No, I wouldn't. I don't know who won it. But I don't even know if it was, I'm sure it was published, but I don't know who won it. But anyway, Eddy would always say there's a $500 horse with a $10,000 tack, because the saddle was beautiful, the bits were beautiful, and all fixed up. Bullet was a gorgeous horse. I always thought Bullet was pretty, period, but I'm not a very good judge of horse flesh.
Possum was black. They were looking for a black quarter horse, isn't that right?
And, and his name was Possum.
And my understanding, visiting with the Cunninghams, the tie, that it's not that easy to find an all-black quarter horse. They're not bred very much anymore. It was interesting. So,
Bullet was more of a deep, deep brown color than a black color, but all shined up and prettied up, and dressed up. Bullet looked pretty good.
Kind of again back to your comments about the tack and the saddle and how it evolved, because it's fairly elaborate. I know, but can you describe what that first year or two when you had John Bill and Rusty, and what was those first couple years? What was their tack and their saddle and their apparel?
Well, they had their own saddles. They wore they had their own saddles because they had their own horses.
So regular rodeo saddles.
And they wore jeans, chaps, white shirts, vest, kind of a light orange vest with OSU on it, and black hats, and carried a OSU flag.
How has that changed or evolved in their apparel over the years?
Well, they're more into black now.
The shirts,
yeah.
the black shirts.
Well, they've got white shirts, but everything else is mostly black.
Black jeans, and black chaps, etc.
When the Spirit Rider first started, Eddy didn't want to put a lot into it until he wanted to see how it was going to catch on. And then I think even he was kind of surprised how it caught on. One of his very, very good friends, Jim Hamilton, the statue that sits out in front of Gallagher Iba, the university wanted a statue made of Bullet, or made of the horse and the rider, the Spirit Rider. We didn't have Bullet then. And so the rider that sits on top of that horse out there is actually fashioned after John Bell and Della, the first Spirit Rider. So Eddy and Jim drew the design. Jim molded it, and then the casting for that statue out there was from a foundry in Lubbock. It was poured in Lubbock and transported here.
So did I pick up a little bit of that first year when you said you weren't sure how to catch on? It was a sort of a trial year. I mean,
it was kind of a trial.
Let's see how it works attitude.
Well, you had Pistol Pete, who was really the iconic figure for OSU, and you had to be careful not to step on anyone's toes, because again, you're coming in with something new, and you didn't want people to think that you were trying to replace Pistol Pete with the Spirit Rider. So what Eddy did, he was very careful in the way that he presented the Spirit Rider versus Pistol Pete. He didn't run out there and try and overshadow Pete. So they, it was after the touchdowns that he rode the horse came out.
So from the get-go, in the very first year in '84, they actually would run out in the field after the touchdowns and the field goals?
Not the field goals, just the touchdowns. And they had the full field. They ran from goal line to goal line.
Which is what Mask Rider does at Texas Tech, isn't that correct? Mm-hmm. So that's sort of
But around the field at Tech is a oval track, and the horse runs around that track, and so it's never out on the field. The reason the horse only goes out to about the 20-yard line now is because when Kenny Bailey, who was the fourth Spirit Rider, that we had scored a touchdown, and OSU used to have this huge drum that they would pull out on the field. And the Bailey boys, again, Brad and Kenny and Steve. Now, Steve was not a Spirit Rider under Eddie, but Brad and Kenny were. Rode their horse, and she was a quarter horse. Her name was Penny. And she was an all-black horse, very beautiful horse, but very, very highly strung. Anyway, Kenny is getting ready to run out onto the field, or ride out onto the field, and the ref, they pulled this drum out, and the ref came around the other side of the drum and ran into the horse, and it knocked him down. And he got really angry, and he said the horse knocked him down, which in fact it didn't. The horse he actually ran into the horse. Well, after much negotiations, Eddie said that he would take the Spirit Rider off the field if they didn't get rid of that drum. And he used some adjectives there, but he hated the drum. He thought it was a very big deterrent, and he thought it was really a hazard out there with the horse, because you're dealing with over 50,000 people. You're dealing with people that are on the field. You're dealing with the drum. You're dealing with Pistol Pete. You're dealing with cheerleaders, pom girls. So you have to be careful, and that's why he was very, very careful about the safety of everybody, and he felt like
it's a very unnatural act for a horse to run out on the field with 50,000 screaming fans, isn't it?
Well, that's why Penny always had cotton in her ear so she couldn't hear.
So it'd be interesting that John Bill and the Bailey boys and Rusty, and they all rode their own horses for those first 4 or 5 years then.
Now Todd Honer didn't have a horse of his own, so he rode Penny. And
the Bailey boys' horse.
Yeah, the Baileys had Penny, and so she rode every year that they rode. I don't know about Steve. I don't know if he rode Bullet or not, because again, when Eddie quit being advisor and really gave up the program, then I really quit going to the games and really didn't pay that much attention to it.
Nancy, again, pretty high-strung horses, and we talked about and all the distractions, etc. Did they do some pre-work with the horses to prepare them for? Did they just bring them in, run them out of the field, or did they?
No, not really, because
did they used to music or anything?
They put cotton in their ears, but you have to understand these were the boys' horses. These were horses that were their roping horses, that were their rodeo horses. So these boys could handle their own horses.
And these horses had been in parades and rodeo events.
Well, they had been in rodeo events. I mean, Della was John's, Rusty had his horse, Penny was the Bailey boys' horse. I mean, they could handle their horse, so it wasn't like you had a rider that could not handle the horse. That's why it was very important for them to have a farming and ranch background, because they had to know how to handle the horse. And that's why Eddie was very adamant about getting a horse that was going to be able to be ridden by anyone. If a child should run up behind the horse, that the horse wouldn't kick the child in the head, If somebody came up and wanted to pull the mane of the horse or the tail of the horse wasn't going to be fidgety. And the first Bullet was like that. Very, very sweet, docile horse. Just kind of, laid back, loved to run out on the field, So that's what he was looking for.
Well, what can you tell me about that person, John? John is pronounced Bell. It's
Bell,
B-E-A-L-L, but pronounced Bell.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about John. I mean, his personality a little bit. I mean, 'cause, being the first Spirit Rider, we got to know a little more about him. His personality, where he grew up, what he did, some things you know about him.
Yeah, John was cute, cocky, great guy. You know, we loved him to death. Pretty full of himself. His father was an equine vet in Norman and worked on a lot of show horses and whatnot. So John had been around horses all his life. Excellent horseman. I mean, could really ride. Adored my husband. Thought he was wonderful. And worked very closely with Eddie the years that, you know, when the rodeo club got up and going, he became president of the Rodeo Association. And really the transformation of John from a really cocky, young, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old guy to a very mature person by the time he graduated was in large part due to Eddie, you know. Eddie loved his students. He loved teaching. He loved doing what he was doing, but he was a disciplinarian. You did it my way or you didn't do it at all. Because his way was a way that was thought out very carefully. I mean, the spirit rider, most people think that on game day you get on the horse, you score a touchdown, out goes the horse, and the outcomes. There's a lot of planning that goes into that. And from what I can tell, and, you know, I don't know Ty real well, but from what I can tell, not too much of it has changed from the time it was first started. I don't know how they pick their spirit riders now. But Tony Payne is a good friend of mine, and John Martin, they co-wrote the Cowboys Forever song. And when they were doing the filming of bullet riding in the range and whatnot, I was out there with them when they were doing that, because one of my good friends is Jamie Payne, Tony's wife. And, you know, there's been some changes, of course, because we're talking about a program that's been going 26 years, so you would expect some changes. But there hasn't been dramatic changes to the program. Probably the most dramatic change is that most of the spirit riders have later been girls, which, and that's fine, you know. But
how would Eddie feel about that? Is he more a traditional guy?
My husband was very traditional, very traditional. It's not that he was chauvinistic at all. If he ever had a female that could have ridden the way those guys did, which I'm sure there were plenty of around. But again, this was at the very beginning of the program. This was in the 80s. And this is when this program first started. He was not comfortable with putting a female on the horse. Now, if he were alive today, if he were choosing today, I would venture to say he would probably have chosen a female. But back in the day, he wouldn't have felt comfortable with it.
Nancy, asking you also, it seems like, think about John and Rusty and the Bailey boys, they all knew each other all on the rodeo team and together. So the first about 4 or 5 years it was sort of like just one buddy handed to the next buddy.
Yeah, kind of.
And
but it was open up. It was opened up. I mean, you know, applications were taken, and there was a committee that looked at the applications.
So they still had the pretty strict application process even those first 3 or 4 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. As long as my husband was the advisor, that's how it went. You know, applications were taken, the applications were reviewed like with any job. The most qualified candidates were the ones that they re-interviewed. And it just so happened the most qualified applicants were all rodeo boys, you know. I mean, these were boys that were out there on saddle broncs or bareback or bull riders or ropers, you know, and that's what you wanted when you put somebody out on that field. And so,
particularly in those first 2 or 3 years when you're trying to be sure nothing goes wrong and things are right with the program.
Well, Eddie didn't want, first of all, anybody to be injured. So that was his main concern, you know, the fans, and as the program progressed year to year and as it became more and more popular, everybody wanted their picture with the horse. Everybody wanted their picture with the spirit rider. You know, they were really in demand to do this, that, and the other, go to this function and that function. And Eddie did take the horse to El Paso. And it was when Todd Honer was the spirit rider. So that had to be in, let's see.
At the Sun Bowl game?
88, yeah. That's when we had that big ice bowl. And he got he got stuck there, and he was with another professor, one of his good friends, James White, who was also in the ag ed department, and James went with him. And he called me and said, boy, he said, the weather's gorgeous here. He said, not a bit of, forecast looks like they just made a mistake. And the next day they dubbed it the ice bowl. That was the only time he took the horse. And
was there any, picking up on that, was there any, today they'll make a few other appearances at different places, but then, those first 4 or 5 years, other than home OSU football games and the one event there in El Paso, did they attend or participate in like 89er parade in Guthrie or anywhere else at all? Okay.
No.
Were there requests, as you indicated, for them to?
There were some requests, but Eddie didn't. He didn't want to do it. He just felt like, it caused, being in a lot of trouble. I mean, it's, and he would take the horse off the field in the fourth quarter with about 3 minutes left in the game. 3 to 4 minutes to take the horse back to the Ansai Arena to avoid all the traffic and whatnot. People trying to come up and, pet the horse and do all of that. So
one of the questions that came to mind is how that first group, especially, and it's kind of continued today, 1 year for Spirit Rider. Now, Pistol Pete's will normally do 2, maybe 1, but normally a couple years. Was it decided that 1 year would be? It
was usually a senior. And I don't know if it's still that way, but when Eddie was the advisor, it was a senior.
But did they talk about we really want them with just 1 year and turn it over to somebody else?
No, I don't really, when he decided that, John was a senior, Rusty was a senior, all the boys were a senior under Eddie, and then they graduated. So I don't know if that tradition is still the same. I think it is, because it seems like there's a different Spirit Rider every year.
You talked about pulling Bullet, early off the field for the games. Where did they keep Bullet when Bullet wasn't performing at the ball games?
Bullet was kept at the Ansai Arena.
Animal Science Arena.
In the stables over there. That's where Bullet was.
Somebody was assigned to take care of Bullet. Was that usually the Spirit Rider or somebody else?
No. The core boys would go over and check on Bullet, but it was usually who was at the stable and
whoever was working.
Make sure that the horse was fed and taken care of. Bullet was a highly pampered dog or horse, not dog, horse.
Yeah. Well, did Eddie help any with the training of the horses?
No.
And just up to their owner actually. Okay.
These horses were the boys' horses, and they were used to the boys, and the boys were used to them. And, these were their roping rodeo horses. They're horses they rode all the time. So there really wasn't any training per se. And I guess if you don't have that farming, ranching background, you don't really understand that there really wasn't any training for Bullet either. I mean, you were a cowboy, you had grown up on a horse, you knew how to ride a horse, you knew how to handle a horse. That's why it was so imperative that when the new Spirit Rider was chosen, that they had that background. You couldn't take somebody that went down to the territory and bought a pair of boots and put a hat on and said, I'm a cowboy, and put them on a horse. Because if you had never ridden a horse before, you wouldn't be able to handle a horse and a flag. And that flag is heavy. When you are guiding your horse or Bullet with one rein and you're holding a flag up above with one hand, you've got to have the experience that it takes to ride that horse. So to put someone that didn't have that experience would not have been a wise choice. And to my knowledge, and I talked to Ty Cunningham about this, that hasn't changed. It's still a farming and ranch background with the people that ride the horses.
Let me go back and see if I understand right. When we're talking about the incident with the official that used to run down length field, what year was that?
Oh gosh, let me think. What year was that? Let's see. Kenny was a Spirit Rider. That probably would have had to been probably 87, 88 year. Yeah. But it really shook Kenny up because the official came up screaming and yelling at him, and the umpire actually, the head ref actually came up to Eddie said don't worry about it. And they did look at the films
Mm.
and found out that the ref was really at fault, not Kenny and not the horse. And, they decided right then and there, Eddie and the head guy decided that they'd just run out to the 20-yard line and get the drum off the field.
They've let them fudge a little, get out to the 30 or 40 now, I think, haven't they?
Yeah, they go out just a little bit further.
How did Eddie feel about the Development Spirit Rider program and his role in helping implement it? I mean, was it a source of pride for him?
Not really.
Did you feel just a little bit good about it? I mean,
Not really. You would have to know my husband. My husband was he was a very intelligent man. He was highly thought of by his peers and his students. To this day, if you mention my husband's name on campus and those people that knew him, you will hear people say what a great guy he was. He really was. He never looked for any kind of glory for himself. He never liked to take credit for himself. All the credit he gave to his students, and he gave to the boys that rode the horse. He gave to his Spirit Rider Corps. He wanted them to succeed. He gave them the foundation for success, and then he gave them the tools to be successful, and he guided them in that direction. But he never said, oh yeah, I started the Spirit Rider program, and he was not that kind of man. In fact, the garden at Ag Hall that is dedicated to him with the plaque that's on the back of the Spirit Rider statue, Eddie would not have liked that. He would have, he was not a glory hound. He loved what he did. He loved teaching. He loved being a mentor. He loved being a father, a husband, a friend. He loved being all those things. But as far as being somebody that took a great deal of pride in his participation in anything, he was not like that. So if he were here today and you were to ask him if he was prideful that the Spirit Rider tradition has survived as long as it has, he would tell you it has only survived because of the people that are behind it.
Was he proud of the program itself, though?
He was proud of the program. He was proud that, his students had recognition, because it brought a lot of recognition to the College of Ag. I mean, people really, the boys were coming out of the College of Ag. They it brought them recognition. But as far as Eddie went as a personal, glorification, it just, no. He didn't seek that.
Looking back, what are your thoughts on the Spirit Rider program, Nancy? How do you feel about it?
I'm very proud of the Spirit Rider program. I'm very proud that it is sustained for as long as it has. I'm very proud that when I watch that horse run out on the field, I still see my husband down there on the field. It's kind of a bittersweet. And everything that was decided as a couple, we decided together, and the Spirit Rider program was no different. Because when the Spirit Rider program and the Rodeo Association and the advisorship and working towards being full professor and working towards being a full member of the graduate college, that took my husband away from home quite a bit, and we had 2 young children at the time. But it was something that we discussed. It was something that was important to both of us, to his career and to our family. So when I look at the Spirit Rider now and all the accolades that it has brought, and when Eddie passed away in May of '96, and I was coming down Hall of Fame, and I looked over at the statue, and there was a big pile of yellow roses lying there. It made me feel pretty good, because their tradition has not changed that much. The faces have changed, the advisors have changed, but the way the program has been run and the way that it is still, here comes Bullet, and people just still get excited. It's I take a great deal of pride in that for my husband and for all the boys that went before, and young women that went before that.
Can you pick out some special moments or special memories that of your and Eddie's participation in the program through the years?
Oh, let's see. Probably at our rodeo banquets, and you know, the boys always wanted to do something special for Eddy, and one year they gave him a beautiful, beautiful statue of a rider and a cowboy with a plaque, you know, that really said, for everything that you've done for us, for all you meant to us, you know, Dr. Finley, we appreciate you so. And you know, that was very touching for Eddy, because he wanted them to feel like they had accomplished something, and if he were a small part of their accomplishments, then he was happy with that. But yeah, you know, going out to the barn on Sundays and brushing Bullet, putting the kids on the horse, and you know, just our family time that we had, not Bullet, but Bullet, we had Bullet by then. But you know, Eddy only ran Bullet for about 1 year before he got to the program, but it was a hard decision for him, and we talked about it. He had already accomplished, Eddy always set goals. You know, in this many years I'm going to do this, in this many years I'm going to do that. So his goals were, I'm going to get tenure, I'm going to become a full professor, I'm going to be a member of the graduate college. By this time, the Spirit Rider program is off to a good enough start that someone else can pick it up and go with it. If they want to change it, whatever they want to do with it, it's their thing, you know. Because once he was finished with something, he was done. You know, he didn't advise anymore. He didn't give any kind of pep talk to the new person. He didn't tell them how they should run their program, because then it was their program. So, you know, the moments that I think we had with our family, and it was a source of pride to Eddy that the program was doing as well. But was it a source of personal pride to him? No. It was a source of pride that the right guys rode the right horses at the right time, and that the public had accepted the Spirit Rider. And as far as Texas Tech goes, they never said a single thing about, you know, well, you tried to take the mascot away from Tech, because they're really two different things. I mean, they both run out, you know, after the touchdowns. The masked rider runs out after the field goals. You know, the horse doesn't. They're not dressed the same way. The horses aren't the same color. The masked rider's horses used to come from a place called Post, Texas, and they were all quarter horses, black, pure black horses. You know, the first Bullet wasn't very pretty to look at. I thought he was beautiful, but Eddy said he was ugly.
And he would know.
Yeah, and he would know, you know. I said, this is the most gorgeous horse. He goes, this is the ugliest horse I've ever seen, Nancy, but he's sweet. And he said, that's what I'm looking for.
When Bullet first started training and coming out in the field, we talked about earlier, ran the length of the field.
Mm-hmm.
And now Bullet runs out with, beginning the band, you know, before the
Right.
pregame. Did Bullet at that time do that as well, and run down the middle of the field with the band in those first few years?
At the very beginning.
So,
Yeah.
so the routine has pretty much stayed the same,
Yeah.
with the exception of running the length of the field.
And by the time that Bullet was Bullet wasn't running the length of the field. Bullet was only running to the 20-yard line, because after the incident with Kenny Bailey and Penny, then it was 20 to about the 22-yard line is as far as the horse ran.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that first year or two there was just, you were out there, so you were part of the crew.
Yeah, I was the crew.
You had Eddy and John Bell.
Yeah,
that's about it.
Yeah, that was it.
When did that change? Because now, you know, they have a crew of about 4 or 5 that help.
Oh yeah, it probably changed starting the year that the next year Eddy decided that they
Second
needed
year.
a core, because you know, we had 2 babies at home, and I told him I couldn't be the crew all the time.
If
and
you got hurt, what would you do?
Yeah. But he started saying, you know, we needed a Spirit Rider Corps, and then he started looking at sponsors, like for the clothes and for the trailer. And when Stedman's contacted him and said they wanted to donate a trailer, the Spirit Rider program was not a big deal for Oklahoma State. It was a big deal for really the surrounding communities. I mean, including Tulsa, because that saddle, the original saddle, came from Tulsa. That is a beautiful saddle, but
They still use the same saddle. Do you
I don't know if they still use the same saddle or not, but it is a beautiful saddle. If they don't, it's a shame that they didn't, because that was one gorgeous
Could you
saddle.
describe that a little bit for us? It had you then had the
Oh yeah, it had
the
the
neck,
halter
breastpiece,
and all the breast pieces, and it was silver inlaid and tooled. It was, I think Ed said it was between a $10,000 to $12,000 tack.
Wow.
And all that was donated, and then of course Teeners donated the clothes, and
Yeah, the Spirit Riders get to keep the clothes, and they after their years for Spirit Rider, and then they provide boots as well. They got
no, they wore their own
Their own
boots,
boots,
yeah,
okay.
and their own hats.
Mhm.
If you're a real cowboy, you're particular about those kind of things. I found out a long time ago.
Well, one thing about Eddie, we were talking about, of course, we were talking about his connection with Spirit Rider, don't you? But can you share a little about his career? Aside, he had a life aside from Spirit Rider. He got, after he finished his doctorate, of course, he went back for a few months, come back on as assistant professor, worked his way through the ranks as a full professor. You remember some of his research, some of his activities, some of the things he did?
Yes, he wrote Eddie taught several courses. He taught an international agricultural course that he basically put all the material together himself, and there wasn't a textbook, and wrote the syllabuses for that. And a company contacted him and asked him if he would write a textbook, and it's called International Agriculture. And there is a copy of it in the public library here. I don't know if there's a copy at OSU. I would pretty much think so, because it's still sold, and he wrote that book at home and at work. He also asked Dr. Price to go in on with him on that. Dr. Price really didn't write the textbook, but he, because he thought so highly of Dr. Price. And at that time, Dr. Price was an emeritus professor here. And so Ed had several publications. He wrote the textbook. He was a member of Pi Beta Kappa, is that honorary fraternity. Again, as I said a while ago, highly intelligent, very successful man. Very had a waiting list for his international agriculture up to 2 years. I mean,
His courses were international education and other.
in ag, international education, agriculture. It's called international agriculture. But, he was an advisor to many undergraduate programs. He had waiting lists because people wanted Dr. Finley to be their advisor, because he made sure that they had everything they had to have before they graduated, which a lot of advisors didn't take a lot of time. So on any given week, we had 3 or 4 students in and out of our house at a time, because he'd bring them home to work with him so he wouldn't have to stay at the office so late. So our house kind of had a revolving door, because back in the early years when the Spirit Rider and the Corps and all of that, they would come in the house and they would eat and they would go out, because every Friday we'd bring the trailer over to our house and wash it and polish it. The boys would and get things ready. So, he was a member about everything. He, as I said before, he set goals for himself, and he gave himself a time limit, and during that time limit he accomplished those goals. And once he finished with his goals, then he said, I'm done. I'm giving up the Rodeo Association, I'm giving up the Spirit Rider, I'm giving up all that, because, you've put up with me doing that all these years, and now it's going to just be, time for us, and I'm not staying late anymore, and I'm not doing this. And he did, and then he gave that up, and 3 months later he got sick. So
The Spirit Rider crew, we talked about that in the second year, kind of put a crew in. Was the crew, did it consist primarily of other students who had applied but perhaps didn't get the Spirit Rider?
it just, not necessarily, and again, it was most members of the rodeo club. Most of everything in the early years was taken from the rodeo club. Just because of the experience that they had. And the 4th year that we had it, there was one young lady that was a member of the Corps. So she really wanted to become Spirit Rider, but she couldn't handle the horse, and so she wasn't very happy when she was not chosen. But and I think her name was Amanda something or another.
You mentioned that there's a Eddy Finley Memorial Garden by the Ag Hall.
Right in front of Ag Hall.
Dedicated right in front there on Monroe Street. Can you talk a little bit about how that come about and what the memorial says?
Well, back in Eddy died in May of '96, and Bob Terry contacted me in January of 1997 and said that he had met with the Board of Regents and with the president, and I'm trying to think who the president was at that time, but in honor of Eddy, because of everything that he had given to the university, and in the name of, the Spirit Rider, and just, it's kind of hard to tell you about that because you didn't know my husband, but, just because of who he was, and, my husband was he was a great prankster, and he was just fun. He was just a fun person. But he said that they wanted to take that area right in front of Ag Hall and develop a garden, and they wanted to dedicate it to Eddy. And so I said, well, okay, that was fine. And he said, well, the only deal is that we want to present you with a citation from Governor Keating, and Terry Ingmeyer was going to present it to you and the children, and would you be willing to do that? And I said, well, we can do that. And I talked to the kids first, and my son wasn't really up for it, but he said he would do it because he was only 12 when his dad died, and then our daughter was 13. And so in October of 1997, and John Bell came for it, and most of the Spirit Riders came for it, that all the Spirit Riders that had been under Eddy were there. And we dedicated this, and it's a very pretty garden. I mean, the landscaping and architecture program keeps up the garden and the physical plant and all that. But Eddy had a favorite saying, and it was, teaching is art, you too can be an artist, choose your paintbrushes carefully. And on this granite plaque is that saying that he said, and then it has his name on there, and that's right. Excuse me, in front of Ag Hall. Excuse me. But anyway, then I believe it was in 1999 when they wanted to dedicate the plaque that's on the Spirit Rider.
We were talking with Nancy earlier about the Spirit Rider initially being a mascot of the band, and I sense that there's not very many people who understand that in Oklahoma State. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, Eddy was in his office, and the band director at the time, I believe it was Bill Ballinger, called and said that the band wanted to have a mascot. They wanted to have their own mascot, separate from Pistol Pete, separate from the big OSU drum. They want something that would distinguish them. So he was wondering if Eddy could come up with something that the band could say was their mascot, and that's kind of how the concept of the Spirit Rider evolved. Probably, as I just said, the Spirit Rider has probably now been incorporated into being one of the mascots of Oklahoma State. But in the early inception of the Spirit Rider program, probably the band members at that time and maybe a couple of years down the line knew that that was their mascot. Today, I doubt very seriously if they do, because it really wasn't a widely publicized fact whenever Eddy started the program.
What would we want to know about Eddy Finley that we don't know? Most people wouldn't know.
Eddy was a very fun person. He was a huge prankster. You were lucky if you could pull a prank on him, because he knew every prank there was and pulled many of them on his colleagues as well as students as well as his family. He had a great passion for what he did. He loved teaching. He loved his students. They loved him. he was a very humble man, a very simple man. Did not, meeting him, knowing him, you felt like you knew him forever. He had no airs about him. Highly intelligent man, very goal-oriented, wonderful father, amazing friend, wonderful husband. He was just the total package. He accomplished a lot in his life. It ended too quickly. But his lasting legacy to Oklahoma State University and to Texas Tech University is the remembering of who he was by the people who knew him, by the family that loved him, by the Spirit Writer program, by the things that he accomplished in the short time. He was a professor here at OSU for 12 years. And that would have to, I think, be his legacy. Would be what he brought to the university in the short amount of time that he was alive and able to accomplish what he did in the short amount of time, even after he became sick, and continued to teach and to mold, as he always said, young lives. He didn't think that when you got your bachelor's that was enough. You needed to go ahead and get your master's. And when you got your master's, he thought you needed to get your doctorate. He always wanted to push you just a little step further. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And a lot of people went on to accomplish those goals. Again, if you ask anybody that knew him, very few people will ever tell you that he wasn't a great guy. In fact, I can't think of anybody that would tell you he wasn't a great guy. He was just the kind of person that you really liked, and you liked immediately. He could be tough as nails. He could dress you down, and while you were walking off, you'd think, did he just get on to me about something? Because he was very quiet. He was a very mild-mannered. But I think what people didn't realize about him more than anything was he had a great zest for living, and people that fell prey to his pranks. They'll tell you about that too. But he and James White were very, very close and very good friends. And James was an exceptional guy, and he's greatly missed too. So.
The Eddy Finley Memorial Garden is not very many people have a memorial on this campus for them, and he was only here 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
Fitting tribute to the man whose vision and persistence were really critical to launching the OSU tradition of the Spirit Writer.
Mm-hmm.
Got to be pretty proud of that.
I am very proud of it. I'm proud of it for our children. I'm proud of it for the legacy that he has left for Jessica and Justin and for their children. My son's daughter, the granddaughter that Eddie would have just been crazy about. These are things that can't be taken away. These are things that are immortalized, that, this was what your dad did, or this is what your granddad did. He's missed every day by his family as if it was just yesterday. We miss him. We miss his guidance. We just miss him. It's, he's been gone for 14 years, but he's still greatly loved and greatly missed.
So tell me what's happening in your life now, Nancy. What are you doing?
My life, my children. I raised my children. My daughter Jessica, our daughter Jessica, graduated from the University of Kansas. She graduated with a degree in human biology and with a minor in toxicology, and she's now a paramedic for Johnson County in Kansas and lives in Lawrence. My son, or our son, Justin, is a sergeant in the United States Army, and he has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. He is an Army Ranger. He is a 2-time awardee of Purple Heart. outstanding young man, engaged to a beautiful young lady who is also a sergeant in the Army. They have a beautiful little precious baby girl, 7 months old, and her name is Sage Elizabeth Finley. And she and Mama are right now stationed in Belle Chase. And so Daddy and Mama put lots of miles on the airline because one of them's going back and forth either every month or every other month, and they'll be getting married in this next December. I am the health unit manager at the Mercury Cruiser plant in Stillwater, and that's about it.
I appreciate taking time. See, anything we miss, Nancy, we want to talk about and bring up that we haven't covered?
No, I think we covered the program very well. It was important that this program succeed for Eddy because it was a program that he felt if it caught on, the university would really like. So he was very cautious with how he presented the program. He was very cautious not to go overboard when it first started. One of the reasons why John was the first spirit rider is because, again, of the relationship he had with John. And he said the only way that he would become advisor or founder of this program is if John Bell would become the first spirit rider. So John didn't have to go through all the rigmaroles of everything. They talked about it. John would come over to the house. They talked about it, kind of cooked up a plan of what they were going to do. And again, it was just a little dog. Eddy called it a dog and pony show when it first started because that's kind of what it
really was.
And, from there, it has grown into this great tradition for the university. So no matter where I go or no matter where his children go, they can look back on pride that, yeah, my dad started that program. And, my friends to this day, when I'm on campus and they introduce me, they always say, well, her husband, Dr. Finley, started the Spirit Rider program. Oh, and which is nice, but, it's not necessary really. Bittersweet when you see the horse running out on the field and I'm seeing my husband standing down there on the field, But the program, the tradition, is only gotten better and hadn't changed too much. And that's I think, a very big pat on the back and respectful of the people that have taken over the program, that they have stayed within the tradition. And that shows the integrity, I think, of the program, because you still have those people that know how to ride a horse going out on that field. And that's all Eddy ever wanted. He wanted people to enjoy what they were doing, to be safe while they were doing it, and to have a good time. And I think that they do. And I think it's been a lot of fun. And I'm proud in that aspect that it has sustained as long as it has, and I think it will continue to. I mean, this is an agricultural university, and the Spirit Rider is a
the Cowboys,
great,
after all.
That's right, and this is a great figurehead for that. It doesn't take away from Pistol Pete at all.
You sense that the Spirit Rider, being sort of the Western motif, the rodeo, the cowboy, the Western heritage, and being cowboys, is that where you feel like he fits in with that?
Yes. And, Eddy wanted the Spirit Rider to be symbolistic of a working cowboy. That's what he wanted to be like. People had ideas of, let's put him in a white outfit with orange chaps and fringe and an orange and white hat. And Eddy goes, absolutely not. He said, these people that are on this horse are going to know how to ride. And they're going to look like a working cowboy. They're going to look like a cowboy that's getting ready to go out and go branding or roping or going on a cattle drive. He said, because that's what this school is. This is an agricultural school. So, we're not out there to have some kind of silly-looking guy sitting on a horse.
Some dude.
With a 10-gallon hat that's white, trimmed in orange. And he said, absolutely not. And, he pretty much what Eddy asked for, and he pretty much got, just because he was always prepared. He was never caught, He never did anything by the seat of his pants. Nothing. Including stuff at the house. When he had a project, it was perfect. When he built the deck at our house, every slat, every post, everything was completely and specifically set perfectly, because he did not do anything unless he knew that it was going to be perfect. And that's just the legacy of the Spirit Rider. You know, it was a perfect fit for this university at that time, and it has continued to be. You know, when you see the plane crash that occurred with the basketball team, the first picture they went to was the Spirit Rider horse. I mean, it's a symbol of what Oklahoma State has become. And that I do take a great deal of pride in. Take a great deal of pride in my husband.
Well, you should. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.